Before we go any further, I have to urge you and remind you to check out my Patreon, as this is a new series on the channel and this is a new era with new different kinds of videos that I'm going to be doing. Last week I did the Essentials video for Art Pop, and that will be a continual series that I will be doing on this channel. And this is a new series as well where I do the top 10 rankings for different artists, and you can request these videos on my Patreon and worst to bests and other kinds of videos too. If you go check out there, if you want to support me, help me out financially, it would be fantastic, and also get your own requested videos too. So please have a look at that, that would be brilliant. Let's get on with this one. I'm looking forward to it. Top 10 Frank Ocean songs. This is a good one to do because I think there's a slight misconception around me a little bit whenever I've spoken to people about Frank, whenever I've talk to people about his music. I think some people think I like it a little bit less than I actually do, but it is not true. It's not true. I absolutely adore Frank, and I would honestly put him ridiculously high in a sort of ranking of the best artists or my favorite artists of the modern era. That could be another video in itself, actually. I didn't think of that until I just said it out loud, but I might do that at some point. I think that'd be fun. I think that'd be fun. And while my actual official ranking of his albums might not be the most agreeable, I can't seem to find many people that would agree with my ranking generally, which I might do a separate video of his albums one day too. It doesn't mean to say I don't think he's brilliant. I think his vocals are so powerful and emotive. He's so good at melodies and creating a really good tune. I think all of his albums have fantastic tunes on them. And I think just generally, as an artist, as a writer, I don't think he's perfect, but I think what he, sets out to achieve is pretty much nailed on with all of his albums. And I think, honestly, I think there could be even more brilliance from him. Like, I think he hasn't actually hit his potential of putting out, an amazing album. Like, he has brilliant albums, he has fantastic albums, but I don't know, there's something about Frank that just makes me think that his next one, or maybe in years to come, he could give us some wonderful music that we haven't quite heard yet. So yeah, 10 songs. Want to start with a few honourable mentions because he's got so many I think are brilliant. Not the biggest fan of Endless, but I think Slide On Me is a fantastic highlight from there. I think Ivy is a really beautifully sung track, one of his best vocal performances, but doesn't quite make the top 10 either. We got Lost as well, which is probably one of his biggest songs in terms of how it's become viral since its release. I know it's become a bit of a TikTok thing, but even still, I still think it's a really fun track, one of his best pop tunes as well. Also from the album, I think Bad Religion is a really great concept and a really interesting lyrical idea, and how he turns that into sort of like a love thing as well. I think it's really done really, really well. And also, finally, as my last honourable mention, Novacane from Nostalgia Ultra. Novacane, baby, baby. We had an American wedding. And kicking off the top 10, we got to keep it in the Nostalgia Ultra family, my boys. We got American Wedding at number 10. I think this track is magnificent. And honestly, on any other day, I think could be higher. But the thing that holds it back slightly, and it doesn't hold it back that much because it's in my top 10 and he's got so many songs, but the ever so slightly thing that was holding me back a little bit is that it is literally just the Hotel California instrumental. Now, I've got to say, Frank Ocean has done a wonderful, magnificent job here of doing something that I think could never happen, because I'm not going to lie, I love me some classic rock, I love me some classic music from the 70s, from the 60s, from the 80s, all those eras. I love me some of that. But I just don't like Hotel California. I find it really derivative and dull, and it just feels so endless. No pun intended, but it does feel endless to me, and I just really can't get with it. And somehow Frank Ocean turned that song into something totally different for me, and now I actually really like the instrumental, and I actually think what he did with the lyrics is absolutely mind-blowing, and I think it is one of his best written songs ever. But it doesn't go as high as it could do, because I think the lack of originality with the instrumental holds it back slightly. But he gets huge praise for making an instrumental that I wasn't that keen on originally to be something that I think is really nice. I mean, come on, man, it's just such a great idea for a song, tapping into sort of, I guess, cliches of marriage and how marriage kind of can, fall apart, and how we just don't really seem to realize that this sort of concept holds a lot of people back, and we just seem to, you know, call it cultural ideals and things like that. Like, yeah, marriage is a wonderful thing. So many people stay married for so many years, and generally the success rate isn't that bad, but it's actually starting to get worse, and it's starting to, you know, decrease, and divorce is kind of increasing a little bit as well. Like, I just think a song like this seems so obvious, and yet I can't think of many of the singers that have made a song so powerful in the way that they've presented this statement. And Frank Ocean, man, I think he does a fantastic job. When he's on it with his pen, the pen is on smoke, my friend. It is on fire. Like, the writing here is so good.
And I'm biking with me and my Daniel. Hades got the angels.
Number 9, we got a bit of a Lucy from Frank here, the biking track. This track was just basically a bit of a random single. I think it was around 2017 when he started to just drop quite a few singles that were not really leading to anything, or not really part of anything bigger or grander, but he just kind of did it for the sake of it. And I kind of respect that era a lot more now, looking back. Because I'll tell you right now, when those songs came out, I was pretty vocal in saying that I didn't really like any of them. And I've changed my mind massively. Even Chanel, which isn't one of my favourite Frank songs. Maybe a bit of a spoiler actually saying that out loud, but I think over time it's taken me quite a long time to just start to really appreciate that track. And Biking is another one. I just like how carefree it is, you know? I just like how carefree it is. It just sounds so fun. It just sounds so nostalgic for just, like, you know, your youth, and I guess the idea of, you know, biking. But I also think it's maybe, you know, a bit more of a double entendre as well. But I just think if you were just to look at it at a pretty surface level, take the lyrics for what they are, I think it's just a really sweet song. And the ending as well, which I think probably could go on longer with the I don't know where he pulls that from, but there are little snippets here and there where Frank just kind of dives into something where it seems so unique and different. There are a few tracks on Blonde like this where he kind of just goes into something totally different, and you just kind of sat there thinking, man, you could turn this into a whole song and I wouldn't mind.
It's all downhill.
This is probably considered one of the most basic picks for Frank Ocean. I've seen this sort of kind of become people's, I guess, go-to sort of like, oh, if you're not a real Frank Ocean song, this is your favorite song. And while I have no opinion on that either way, because I don't really know what people mean by that, I just think it's a great track. I just think it's absolutely stellar. I think the smokiness of the instrumental, there's just such a traditional sound to it that just makes it really, really like organic, and just makes it feel like he's tapping into some really, really, like, you know, old school sounds with this track, and his vocals as well. He just sounds so, so good. And yeah, I don't know, man. I just think the little piano melody that drives the song as well. Do, 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 do. I just think it's eternal. Like, this is one of the most eternal songs he's ever made. I think in years to come, this will still sound great. And then the end with those vocal harmonies that come together so well, and it's so rich. I think it's Beyonce, isn't it? That's on this track. Like, what the hell, man? Like, that sounds so beautiful. Like, that in its own is enough to put it on a list like this for me. Like, that section of the track is just so, so stunning. Yeah, one of the best songs from him, in my opinion, quite easily. And while it isn't one that I see people put high when they're thinking of their favorites from Blonde, I find that surprising. Like, I don't know, maybe again with that whole, oh, if you're not a real Frank song, this is your favorite Frank song narrative has pushed this further down the pecking order for a lot of people. I just don't think it needs to really be like that. Look, whatever reasoning isn't high for you, that's fine if you have a valid one. But honestly, man, I think musically this is stunning, one of his best ever. Absolutely magnificent stuff. And yeah, ranks high for me on Blonde, easily. Alright, number 7, again, we have another track that I've seen some differing opinions on over time, but at the time of release, when you look back at reviews of this album, this was like his magnum opus song. Like, people were so blown away by how he was able to put this track together. I still think To this day, while there is another song that I think could be considered toe-to-toe with it in terms of ambition, I think for me this is his most ambitious song ever. I just think the way it's structured, the phases, the way it sort of, you know, changes and kind of keeps you on your toes. And while it's just something really refreshing in terms of how it sounds musically, that thing I've seen people say is that it sounds a bit dated today with the synths and stuff like that. I don't hear that at all. I think it still sounds really good even to this day. And honestly, I struggle to see how people would say it's dated anyway. I don't see what there is dated about this track at all, to be quite frank with you. To be quite frank. But yeah, I think it's a fantastic track. And musically, I've talked about the music. Lyrically, my friends, really don't see people talk enough about how wonderful this track is on a lyrical level as well. Like the narrative, the concept. Like I say, when Frank's on it, my friends, he's an unstoppable writer, because this concept is so good. Basically, he's talking about how, like, you know, Black women were once kind of treated as queens, the Cleopatras, you know? And now, as time's gone on, similarly to marriage, in the way he's talking about American Wedding, you know, as time goes on, things change, and the view of Black women has kind of just really shifted. And now it's like, you know, she's become a stripper. And I like the transition into the darkness of the track as well. Like, it sounds so positive to begin with, because he's kind of upholding and heralding the sort of Black queen that he's talking about. And then it transitions into the darker days and how that same woman is not viewed the same anymore, and, you know, maybe is sexualized to some degree in the sort of stripper industry and things like that. I think it's a really clever concept. I think he's not afraid to shy away from these kinds of topics. And I think Channel Orange was the peak of that, because he touched on some really serious topics on that album that we don't really see as much on Blonde. And I think it's a really, really creative peak for Frank in terms of his writing ability. I think it's a fantastic song.
Super rich kids with nothing but loose ends. Super rich.
And at number 6, to carry on the brilliance of his writing when he's at his best, Super Rich Kids. I think the beat of this track is fantastic. I think the way it sort of sounds stodgy and it sort of sounds slow paced, but it also just sounds great with the way Frank's singing. And one of my favorite things about Channel Orange, man, is just how sing-along everything Frank says is. Even the slower tracks, it just feels like you're hanging on every one of his words. You're drunk, you're at karaoke, and you're just singing your heart out to everything he says. And tracks like this, I think, is great for that, because again, while the pacing of the track isn't speedy, you still feel like you're singing everything he says. You still feel like you want to. And touching on, again, this brilliant writing where he's kind of bolder on Channel Orange that I just mentioned a minute ago, I think this track once again proves that, honestly. The boldness of this writing, tapping into sort of ignorant sort of teens or kids who grow up in just ridiculously rich families who, you know, don't ever have any struggles. They don't seem to know the actual struggles of what ordinary people face. And he's kind of poking into that as well and tapping into it, you know. These super rich kids with nothing but fake friends, because those fake friends are just there because their friends are rich and it's not really proper friendship. There's just such a great approach to this song that, again, I haven't really seen as many artists do it as I'd expect. I feel like this is a really obvious song to write about. And yet I can't name that many that, you know, artists have done over the years. And that's what I like about this album. Frank was just kind of bold and willing to touch on these topics in such a great way.
How you feel? How you feel? You know you were.
All right, we're into the top 5, and I'm happy to announce that one of his biggest songs ever is also one of his best songs ever. Sometimes it do be like that. And Thinking About You is just a stunner from start to end. I think it's an absolute wonderful track that is probably more known for its live performances actually now. I think some of his performances at the time of this song's release became more viral due to his performance rather than the actual song. And it was still a pretty big hit for him anyway. I think it was a top 40 song in America, which is a pretty great achievement, honestly, for Frank. I'm mad to think that he hasn't had many others. I don't know how this is one of his only charting hits, because I just find that baffling. like an artist so talented like this, so accessible as well. It's not like he makes weird music that's so underground and experimental and is all weird and wah wah wah. Like he makes some like really accessible music. All of these songs on this list should have been top 10 hits in any country. I don't get it, man. Anyway, that's a debate for another day. Thinking About You. One of the things I've always said on this channel, and one thing that Frank kind of deviates from the norm for what I usually like, is falsetto can be a bit much. Falsetto generally, anyone doing falsetto can just be a bit much. But this song, I mean, this is what I'm talking about, the emotiveness. When you put all that power into your voice, you know, you can get away with so much. And the fact that he is singing so high for so much of this song should really put me off, but it doesn't. And it's not like I'm giving Frank a pass, because there are other artists as well that can sing in high falsettos, and I like that as well. But just generally, I think too much of it can be too much. But this song, man, he just sounds so good. And trying to reach those notes as well is not easy. Yeah, what a song, and just a beautiful track in terms of the lyrical as well. It's so simple. It's so simple. It's just a simple, you know, love sort of angle song, but it's just brilliant.
My everyday shit, every night shit, every day shit.
Okay, I was mentioning earlier with Pyramids, there is another song that goes toe to toe with the most ambitious song Frank has ever done, and I think this is the other one that I was talking about. This is the other one. Okay, we've got to it. We've got to Nights. This is from Blonde, probably one of the most viral songs from Blonde because of that beat switch up. And I think that beat switch up is just absolutely glorious. Like, honestly, it's one of those beat switch ups that everyone seems to talk about whenever they're, you know, referencing beat switch ups. But it doesn't really matter because it is just that good. And I don't mind that, you know, it is always talked about. It never gets old, you know? It's one of those things that just doesn't get old. It's like the Hot Fuzz of music, this track, you know? Hot Fuzz as a film just never gets old. I could reference that film all day, every day, and everyone could make references to it all the time, and I find it funny no matter what. This song being referenced as a beat switch track or whatever doesn't get old because it's just that good. And hearing it every time just feels so good as well. And even without that, the song itself is just brilliant. I love the instrumental that loops, that it just sounds really great, and then his vocals sound fantastic too. And I think there's, again, a dark quality to this track that taps into things that Frank is really good at when, again, his pen is on fire.
Sweet life, sweet life.
We're in the top 3, and this is definitely going to be the most surprising track on the whole list. Or maybe even my number 2 pick might be surprising for some people as well. I don't quite know what people will think, but again, try to remember that it is my opinion and this is how I feel. And yeah, the Sweet Life, man, this, I don't know what it is, but this track to me is just so good. It sounds so rich and it sounds so dripping in luxury in a way that I can't really say about many of the Frank Ocean songs. That's not an attack on Frank Ocean because his production and his music is brilliant. But there's just such a luxurious quality to this track that only really I could describe as Pink and White, where the instrumental just sounds so lush and sounds so organic. And this track for me just hits that as well. And it has the same sort of, you know, lyrical arc or lyrical idea as Super Rich Kids, you know, tapping into those kinds of, you know, divides, those class divides in society. You know, some people just have it all, some people just have very little, and the people that have it all don't realize how much they actually have, and they don't appreciate how much they actually have because there's so many people out there that will never even come close to what they've got. And I think with this album, Frank Ocean quite a few times is not afraid to tap into these things, and I think it's done so well. You know, Why See the World, when you've got the beach lines like that, I think are really good. And I think the luxurious sound of the track, the kind of, like, you know, expensive jazzy quality to it, is adding to the concept of the song as well. I think that's very intentional from him to do that. And overall, it just makes for such a fantastic song. And this is one of my favorites ever from Frank. And yeah, I don't think this will be high on anyone else's list, but this is just my opinion, of course. All right, we're in the top 2. Again, another track that I don't think many people will have as high as me. But to be fair, I think if you did manage to ever catch my top 50 songs of the 2010s video, this was in there. So, you know, if you saw that and you remember that video, you might actually not be too surprised that this is high, because if it's in the top 50 of the 2010s, it's obviously going to be high on his actual ranking of his own songs, isn't it? But maybe you don't remember that. Maybe you have a life, and maybe you aren't a virgin. So yeah, Swim Good. There's nothing really much to say about this one. It's just a really good pop song. Like, it's just ridiculously good. It's so catchy. And what I said earlier about Frank and his melodies, like, this is just the pinnacle of that. I just think this is just such a brilliantly structured pop tune. And another one that I find bizarre again, and as to how it never really became a hit. I don't know. I just can't quite fathom how songs like this weren't bigger, because I can't imagine anyone who likes pop music not at least liking this track. I don't know. But yeah, this just ends up being here just through how it sounds. The drum sounds really, well, the snare, I guess it sounds really sharp, and it just has such a kick to it, and it drives the track so well. His vocals sound so brilliant, and the chorus is just so sing-along. Yeah, it's not really got any particular deep explanation as to why this is so high. This is just one of my favourite Frank songs ever, because it sounds so good. I'm sorry that it doesn't have a very interesting explanation, but sometimes that's just how it is.
Keep a place for me.
Okay, now we're at number 1. This one I think is a bit easier to describe and make you understand why it is number 1. This, I think, has been so heralded over the years, and I think, honestly, I haven't seen many other Frank rankings, but if I were to guess, this would be many people's top 3, top 5. Like, this would be high for so many people. This right here, man, this hits in a way that I can't describe many Frank Ocean songs hitting. Like, it just feels so pure, and it feels so sad as well. Like, and his emotive singing, as I've kept saying throughout this video, is so hard-hitting on this track, and he sounds so good. Like, he just sings so powerfully on this one. And again, with the transition in the second half, with that no, you gotta leave. That part, my God, my man, that is chills, that part. And there aren't many songs actually I can point to that give me that kind of like spine-tingling chill. But that right there does it every time. And another thing I love about this track as well is how, you know, he kind of incorporates those chipmunky style vocals that he does a little bit on Blonde, particularly on Nikes, with the "Keep a place for me," you know, that part. And I still feel like it sounds really haunting, and just has like just such like an energy to it that feels so, you know, raw. And even though it's not necessarily his natural sounding vocals, it still has that weird effect to still hit you quite hard, the way he's saying it and what he's actually saying too. I think that's a pretty impressive thing to do, because usually stuff like this needs that raw, natural vocal, you know, tone, but it doesn't have that, and it still feels the same. But yeah, you know, the plucking, simple sort of guitar that's kind of playing throughout as well. Oh, it's just a stunner. It's just a stunner, man. And yeah, what a song. And that's the list. That's the list. I'm ending it there. The top 10 Frank Ocean songs ever, in my opinion, up until this date. He's going to make more. We might not hear any more from him in quite some time. He might Fiona Apple us. We don't know. It could be just the new way for Frank. We don't know yet. But until then, this currently is my top 10 ever from Frank Ocean. Yeah, that's it. Hopefully you enjoyed this video. I enjoyed making it, actually. I like to go in a more positive direction with these videos. I get to gush over my favourite artists. I get to be positive about their music, and it's just all my favourites being thrown into one video, and it just feels nice to do. So I hope you enjoyed watching this, and I hope you have some interesting things to say about the video. If you agree, disagree, tell me in the comments what your top 10 is as well. If you have any thoughts on what I said throughout this video, please tell me as well. Have a good day. Subscribe if you haven't already. Please check out my Patreon. That'd be wonderful. You can request your own videos going forward in this series and other series as well. Have a good day and goodbye.